Hey everyone, this is Martin, also known as Anders, bringing you another video. Today I wanted to talk about the Valorant metagame in terms of how it's been developing for team compositions, and so we'll get right into that. Before we get started though, I wanted to give everyone a huge thanks. The feedback on the first video was totally insane. I mean, we hit 3,000 views inside of 24 hours, I believe it was, and for a first video on a brand new channel, that's like absolute nonsense, and so I just wanted to say a quick thank you on that. And sorry for this video taking sort of a bit longer to get out than I originally wanted it to. I've been tracking stats from the T1 qualifiers that Nerd Street Gaming's been doing, and that's been sinking a gross amount of my time. So we'll sort of jump right into things. So far, there's actually been 86 compositions that have been played in competitive Valorant. But one of them has stood sort of head and shoulders above all the rest, and I'm going to talk about that right now. So the composition in question here is what I've been referring to as the common core, sort of harkening back to the common elements in the US education system. So the common core, as I've sort of dubbed it, is Breach, Brimstone, Cypher, and Sage. This appears in what you'll soon see is a crazy amount of the metagame, although the fifth piece that goes with it tends to be relatively varied. So in order to get a solid look at how prevalent each of these fifth pieces is, I'm listing them in order of how much of the overall metagame they represent. So each of the numbers you're about to see and hear are going to be how much of the metagame is taken up by that character showing as the fifth piece of the common core. That is not its percentage of the sort of common core plus one meta, it is the overall meta at large. And so jumping right in, the first on the list is Sova, who when played with the common core is 18.8% of the total metagame. Let that sink in for a minute. Those four characters, plus Sova, is almost a fifth of the entire competitive scene. Next up we have Raze, who drops down a significant amount and represents 6.4% of the overall metagame. Then we have Omen, who drops in at the third most played with the common core at 5.6% of the overall metagame. Then Jett at 3.7%, Phoenix at 3%, and Viper at 2.4%. For those of you who aren't fans of quick maths, that is a total combined presence in the metagame for this common core at 0.1% short of 40%, 39.9%. So this common core, this 4-agent combination, plus any other fifth character, represents creeping up on half of the entire competitive meta. So there's no denying that this composition is a huge part of the metagame, and with good reason. What we should all be immediately thinking about then, though, is what is that reason, or reasons, I suppose. For those of you that haven't seen my agent pick and win rate video, I highly recommend checking that out. It'll give you a lot of insight into the rationale that I use through this video and a lot of future videos, and I'll be sending updates of that on a regular basis to sort of keep an overarching summary in the back of people's minds. But if you sort of harken back to that and then look at this composition, things start to make a lot more sense. You have Breach, who is the statistically best agent in the game right now. He represents an extremely strong entry fragger, sort of secondary entry fragger role, with his flashbangs and his stuns and his nukes and all that fun jazz. He also has one of the best site take and retake ultimates that's available to any agent. And then you look at the other three pieces of the composition, and it's an incredibly strong defensive core. With Brimstone, you have Smokes, which at least on the defensive end of things represents an extremely powerful sort of stall tactic and ability to prevent pushes. On Cypher, you have a solo site defender as well as an incredibly strong lurker when you switch over to offense. And with Sage, you have Sage. Heal, wall, I mean, she's insane. She's in 99% of comps with good reason, and I don't know why she wouldn't be here. So that sort of explains why people are playing it. But I guess the next question is, the fact that it's super prevalent, is it actually any good? The answer to that question is yeah, for the most part at least. Here we're going to have a ranked list from the highest to lowest fifth pieces in terms of win rate with the common core. First up, you have Raze at 53.74% win rate. That comes from a 56.7% win rate on Bind, a 55.4% win rate on Haven, and a somewhat disappointing by comparison 47.1% win rate on Split. Remember, that's aggregated, that's not offense versus defense like was done in my previous video, just so that we can sort of bust through this a little bit quicker. But Raze with the Common Core is going to succeed quite significantly on both Bind and Haven while sort of falling flat on Split. Next up we have Sova at 52.59% overall. That comes from a 52.8% win rate on Bind, a 54% win rate on Haven, and a 49.2% win rate on Split. You guys may remember from the last video that Sova in aggregate has over 50% win rates on every single map, which means that he actually performs worse with this team composition on Split than in other compositions. Next up we have Omen at 51.12%. That comes from a pretty abysmal 42.3% on Bind, mirroring his overall percent win rate on the map, a 53.2% win rate on Haven, and a 48% win rate on Split. So really the only reason that he comes up above 50% at all is his distinct overperformance on Haven. Next up we have Jet at 48.77%. That comes from a 50.6% on Bind, a 48.5% on Haven, and a 45.8% on Split. So again, the only reason she's even close to 50% is going to be her insane stats on Bind that you may remember from my last video. Next up we have Viper at 46.89%. That comes from a 44.7% on Bind, a 49.5% on Haven, and a 44.4% on Split. So really dramatically underperforming at 44% on both maps, sort of salvaged by a nearly 50% on Haven. Last but not least, we have Phoenix coming in at 41.41%. That comes from an impressive 53% on Bind out of the gate, and a 34.74% on Split. But get this, he has a 10.3% win rate on Haven. That's not from a small sample size. This isn't some like random variance thing. There's over 700 rounds of Phoenix playing with this team composition on Haven, and the dude can't hold a win rate more than 11%. Don't play Phoenix with this comp on Haven. Just don't. I'm trying to figure out how something this terrifyingly bad comes to be, and it really just eludes me how this could actually be this bad. There's nothing about Phoenix's kit that should inherently make him horrible on this map, and even if you dip over to the aggregated statistics, it's not Phoenix's worst map overall. He does best on Split, second best on Haven, and third best on Bind. So he's pulling a sub 11% win rate on his second best map overall when played with this composition. So what in the world is the interplay between these agents that makes it this abysmal? At the end of the day, what I sort of came to the conclusion of is that there's a slight bit of anti-synergy when you pick Breach with Phoenix. They fill too much of a similar archetypal role for them to be good in the same compositions. And if I actually pull the statistics for other comps that have both Breach and Phoenix in them, all but one of them have horrible win rates, the sole exception being a Breach, Cypher, Phoenix, Sage, Viper composition on Split, where we know Viper's insane. That's my take on it for now. We'll see how that ages. We'll see if this is just sort of like a small sample size, despite, 700 rounds is no small amount. So maybe we have weird bad luck with skews of better teams facing worse teams on a consistent basis, but we'll see how it goes over time. And so I think there's no denying that this composition is great. It plays amazing, has over 50% win rate on some of the more fleshed out and higher played variants, but being a great comp doesn't necessarily mean it should be 40% of the metagame. There's always going to be a huge gap between good, great, and optimal, and so how far is this away from being optimal? A lot of you may remember that in my last video, I sort of harped on Brimstone being, at least in my opinion, a relatively overvalued pick, especially when he's picked on offense, and I offered up Omen as a phenomenal alternative. So what happens if we take the Common Core, steal out the Brimstone, drop in an Omen, and bring in my other highly touted agent of Sova? So we're going to look at Breach, Cypher, Omen, Sage, and Sova as a composition. It represents 5.15% of the overall metagame and is the single highest win rate comp of all 86 that have been played to date, with that pretty significant 5% metagame sample size. To make matters even more insane, that 57% win rate has gone up with the data that I've added since pulling these original statistics. So while this is undeniably a phenomenal Common Core composition, to say it's optimal and that the meta is quote-unquote solved and that it deserves to be 40% of the metagame is objectively a misplaced commentary. I am massively looking forward to taking deeper dives on this sort of stuff in the future and bringing to you guys what I think and what the stats think are going to be the best compositions as we get more and more data on Tournament Valorant. All right, I'm going to try and keep it short. So that's all I got for today. One thing I forgot to mention in the last one is that I do have tons of socials. If you guys want to follow me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AndersTV. And I also stream if you're ever interested in sort of asking questions about this data set, or you have a specific composition that you're wondering, oh, well, how good is this? Hop into the stream sometime. I'm always open to chat. I'll pull up the data set. I'll throw you whatever stats you want. I love talking about this stuff. I love nerding out. So you can find me over there at AndersTV as well. Thanks again for the crazy support. This has been totally unbelievable. First video on a channel totally blowing up and getting tons of encouragement and tons of feedback. Please keep that feedback coming. There was a lot of things that I realized after the fact and after you guys pointed them out that I could fix to make this video better. So keep them coming. I'm definitely listening, and I'll do what I can to make sure this content is what you guys want it to be. Until the next time, I'll see you around. Thanks.